At the very beginning, I said that the Old Testament had immediate fulfillment in the Old Testament. Like, if you do bad, you're going to be taken into exile, and then they got taken into exile. And there were different pictures and things that happened. But then they were also fulfilled in Christ. When, like Matthew quotes, a voice in Ramah, Rachel weeping for her children because they are no more, and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. That happened in Jeremiah's day when the captives were taken away and taken to Babylon, and the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy that Rachel was weeping for her children. But then Matthew also tells us that that was a fulfilled prophecy in Jesus when Herod slaughtered all the babies in Bethlehem. So there's these Old Testament prophecies that were prophesied, that were fulfilled kind of contextually, but then they also get fulfilled spiritually as well in Jesus. I'm saying that because part of the covenant that God made with Abraham was, know this, that for certain, that your descendants are going to be taken captive into a land not their own, and they'll serve there for 400 years, and then they'll be released, and they'll come out with riches. And I believe that part of that prophecy is that's Genesis 17. But he's talking about Egypt. But he's also talking about your descendants will be taken captive. And so there's that exile. And then the exile that is spoken of in the Mosaic covenant is another exile. But there was also this prophecy, we talked about it last week, it's in Malachi 3, that the Lord who you seek will return to your temple. So that was fulfilled in Jesus when Jesus actually came and was in the temple.
Right.
Like that happened. So that was fulfilled. But there was a greater fulfillment in line of the Psalm 110 fulfillment of the Lord is in his temple. And the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. And Philip, is it Philip or Stephan? The first martyr, Stephen. He looks and says, I see the Lord in his temple, and he's standing there. And so he assured, like, Stephen's testimony is that Jesus is in his temple. So Malachi was right. The Lord whom you seek will return to his temple. But it's even more so that he's in that temple of heaven.
So he spoke of the ascent into heaven after the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Stephen?
No, Malachi.
Malachi was, yes, that was the bigger fulfillment, or the more grand fulfillment, was the Lord coming to his temple. The Lord whom you seek will come to his temple. So the interesting thing is that they went into exile into Babylon, but the nation was also under this idea that even though they were back in Israel and had been released by King Cyrus, and they went back to Israel and they rebuilt the temple and they did all this stuff, there was this underlying feeling that they were still in exile. And they were in exile because their God was not with them. And they were looking for that king to come and to release them from their exile. And so there was that feeling that the exile wasn't over, even though they were in their own land. So I want to point out Matthew 1:17. When Matthew goes through all of the genealogy, he starts out the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, to the son of Abraham, And we're supposed to be clued in immediately that this is the continuation of the promise. We get to verse 17. It says, therefore, all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the deportation of Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the time of Christ, 14 generations. So God had promised Abraham, your children are going to a land not your own. You're going to be a father of kings. God had promised David, you're going to be a father of kings. If you split up those 14s, you get 7 sevens. So 14 generations from Abraham to David, that's 2 sevens. From David to the deportation, that's 2 sevens. From Babylon to Christ is 2 sevens. So here we are at the beginning of the new seventh, the 7 sevens. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of these. So like those sevens in the Bible are this like perfection thing. So it's that verse is saying that the exile is over. Because the promise was that they would be exiled, but here we are at the Christ. The exile is over. The King is coming. Christ is sitting on his throne. You look like you want to say something. No?
It's a lot of information. And
It is. I think I'm winding down. It's like there was, so I don't really have a wrap up today, except to say that they understood that the first century church understood that they were living in this day of the promise of this heavenly kingdom. That the promise to David was in fact here. And the king had come, he had shown everybody what living in his kingdom looked like. And then he offered them to live in his kingdom. And so when they spoke of the resurrection and preached the resurrection, they were preaching the king's here, the promises are done, and miracles and signs and wonders and supernatural, because that's who God is and that's his goodness. So I don't really have a conclusion for today, because it was like I guess the summary of today is Jesus is the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. Jesus is the fulfillment of the Mosaic covenant. And when this fulfillment of the Davidic and Abrahamic covenant, when it happened, that completely ended the Mosaic covenant. And that's all for this week.
That's a lot.
Yes, it is.